had to sum up Clan Tzimisce as a Vampire the Masquerade vampire clan into one word, the word would be inhuman. Welcome to Vampire the Masquerade Clan series, where I try to explain Vampire the Masquerade clans to you, the viewer, even if you had never played Vampire the Masquerade, the tabletop, or any of the video games. Now, clans in the game are kind of like classes in other games, except that they're kind of blood related, so it would be like, what type of vampire are you? Kind of like a BuzzFeed quiz, are you an apple or a banana? That sort of thing. I really want to talk about this clan, but I do know that I'm gonna mess up quite severely in this video because unlike some clans that are kind of easy to explain, this one is yeah, it has a lot of history. It has a lot of. I should stop focusing on my hair inside a video while making a video that is not about hair. God damn it. It has a lot of. I can't really say offshoots, but it has a lot of like little faction like things that have happened in the history of the clan. And the history is long. And I don't just want to sit here making a video about Clan Tzimisce, the history lesson. That wouldn't be very fun. So I'm gonna try and just sum up major events, sort of thing, and just kind of mention things, but that means that this is rather a non-in-depth overlook. Really, there is a wiki page linked in the description down below. Go and read through it and like click into the links when you get to like the history bit and you see like highlighted bits. Just like click into them and also spend time reading, because I went down some rabbit holes and I eventually came back out, but I went down some rabbit holes and then realized that no way am I fitting all of them into one video. We might talk about like vampire history at some point when it comes to Vampire the Masquerade specifically. Not like real vampire history, more like, tabletop. Tabletop, can't really say this is a genre, but a franchise of a tabletop game. Vampire the Masquerade, the vampire history. There we go. So then, I don't actually know how to pronounce Tzimisce. I keep on pronouncing it as Tzimisce. Somebody's probably gonna crucify me in the comment section down below. If I look at the wiki page, it's pronounced as Tzimisce or Tzimisce. Tzimisce will do. Every type of like Vampire the Masquerade clan comes with their own abilities, like powers that are clan specific. See, it's kind of like a class. So inside the version 20 or V20, the anniversary edition, which is the amalgamation of all the previous versions that came before it, which came before V5. V5's the newest one. Tzimisce have the abilities, disciplines of animalism, which is the ability to control and speak to animals. Auspex, which is the ability to like see auras and see intentions and like look into that sort of wavy spiritual stuff. And vicissitude. And vicissitude is the ability to mold flesh and in some cases bone. Once again, Clan Tzimisce is the very inhuman clan. Now, there are parts of Clan Tzimisce that reject vicissitude for the most part, and instead they would take something like Coldenism, which is the control of spirits by force in order to be able to do things with earth, fire, water, and air. It's like becoming a more evil version of the airbender, the avatar people whoever they may be. I am not very much well versed with anime. I apologize. Now, if we go by V5 edition, they tried to simplify the abilities. They made them actually a bit more complicated to figure out because of the implications that they pose. Because more classes use the same abilities but do different shit, which just kind of suggests that they can cross-pollinate and, like, you know, do things that kind of don't belong to their class. It gets weird very fast. But anyway, in that edition, Clan Tzimisce can do animalism, which is still, you know, the animal stuff. Dominate, which is the control of other people's minds, like the ability to issue them commands and they do it, the kind of, you know, overpowering somebody's mind, the brainwashing sort of thing. And protein, which is normally the ability to transform yourself into animal, grow claws, evaporate into mist. It's kind of like your ability to change yourself, but it wasn't this kind of flesh and bones sort of thing. It was more animal related sort of thing, like, you know, transform yourself into a bat or into a mist cloud, not quite mold your hand into a drill. That used to be separate, but now vicissitude is kind of the amalgamation of dominate plus protein. So if you have the two, you can sort of do what vicissitude do. I'm gonna get why version 5's this kind of amalgamation of abilities is kind of problematic from a historical point of view when we kind of talk about the history of Clan Tzimisce, at least a little bit. So every single clan spawns from a third generation vampire, according to Vampire the Masquerade lore. So the first vampire could do everything. The second vampire could do quite close to everything. So, like, whoever the first vampire embraces become the second vampires. It's like a whole generation of vampires. And then the third generation specializes and it becomes a clan. And then only those abilities start getting passed on. So with Clan Tzimisce, the third generation vampire is called the Elder, or the Eldest, more specifically. So it's like the Eldest, like the eldest of them all. The story of him coming into being is that the second generation vampire, Enoch, was seeking to expel all of his bestial properties, and he just spat them out into the existence through this embrace of the Eldest. Now, whoever the Eldest was, like whatever name he had before he became embraced into Clan Tzimisce don't give a shit because they do not really value mortals all that much, if at all. Therefore, whatever you were before you became part of Clan Tzimisce, they don't care. They don't give a shit. Therefore, that part got lost. Now, what follows is a bit complex. The Eldest did a lot of things, among which was save a demon called Kupala from a clan of werewolves that had him imprisoned. And what happened after this point kind of splits. In one version of events, the Eldest kind of damned himself through this action because he came into the position of vicissitude through this demon called Kupala, and the clan became a lot more powerful because they could now just, you know, mold flesh and bone and all that cool shit. But at the same time, they kind of became more damned because of it. The second version is that he subjugated Kupala, but Kupala managed to express himself through the weaker vampires and through the blood of the Eldest, meaning that any old descendant that had strong will rejected vicissitude as like this infection that just spread through the vampires. And all the younger ones that were kind of weak-willed and not that well equipped, they kind of got overtaken by this demon, and it's expressing itself as vicissitude, the ability. Hence that whole split. So there are older Clan Tzimisce vampires that entirely reject vicissitude. They tend to like coldonism, which is, the art of controlling the spirits and forcing them to do your bidding through subjugation. Apparently, it's quite difficult because a lot of Tzimisce that are trying to learn the art kind of end up incinerating themselves in the process. So having any dot in coldonism is kind of seen like a big status thing, but it used to be like the thing among Tzimisce before vicissitude became the thing. So all of like super old Tzimisce vampires, a lot of them would be practicing this. They are its own thing, the ultra super old Tzimisce vampires, and they're not really considered like anti-tribe or going anti-tribute or going against the clan, because they kind of are their own thing, and they consider themselves to be the Dracul, while younger Tzimisce just call them old clan Tzimisce, and they tend to have animalism, aspects, and dominate as abilities. So kind of mixed between version 5 and version 20 as abilities. So once again, talk with animals, control animals, see things like auras, and see the spiritual, and see people's intentions, and see all sorts of nice things, and ability to dominate or control other people's minds. And among them, some of them are gonna be Koldun or Koldunists, which is also the ability to use Koldonic sorcery. Are you still following? Like, this is a pretty difficult clan to cover because of this. So we have established what the old clan Tzimisce are and what the Koldun variation of them is. Let's try and continue with Tzimisce history. But before we do that, do you kind of see why vicissitude being an amalgamation of protein with dominate becomes a bit problematic if you see vicissitude as this demonic virus, which is one of the stories of how it came into being. Dominate and protein are not exclusive to Tzimisce. Gangrel have protein, I believe. Ventrue have dominate. It means that any kind of vampire that has one or the other is like susceptible to this vampire demonic mind virus that can spread if they get the other one. It's why just like pushing a whole bunch of abilities into together in order to make your system a bit more simplistic from the historical point of view of the lore inside the system becomes a bit Anyway, so we have established that Clan Tzimisce have split, right? They have like the old farts that don't really respect the new people, the new kids on the block that by this point are not very new. One thing that would be kind of important to understand is that Tzimisce were never really nice. They have. I can't really say a moral compass or something like that, but they have very strict rules and courtesies that they extend to one another and how they treat each other. Like, for example, that if another Tzimisce ends up in your domain, you give them like a 3-day hospitality and they exchange gifts to you. Each Tzimisce was kind of a lord of his own kingdom. This could be a castle, this could be like a literal kingdom. He had his fields, he had full charge of these fields. He did whatever he wanted with them. Another important mechanic to explain here is the mechanic of blood bonding. If a vampire drinks another vampire's blood consecutively for 3 days straight and renews this at least once a month, they're gonna be like madly in love with this other vampire that they drank the blood off of, and they're gonna be very easily manipulated by that vampire to kind of do whatever they want done. So Clan Tzimisce, being the lords of their own kingdoms, saw no problem with kind of getting more advanced with the whole blood bonding thing. So they can actually tune the blood bonding to have the exact emotions and behaviors that they want the vampire getting blood bonded to exhibit. So, for example, you see another vampire and you're like, they kind of hot actually. I would like them to love me. You can do that. You see another vampire and you're like, they would make a very useful guard to me. You can then blood bond them for loyalty so that they never betray you and that they feel like they need to protect you at all costs. You could be looking at another vampire and go, okay, they're kind of useless, but would make a good servant. And you can do that. Another thing about them is that Clan Tzimisce, a lot of Tzimisce are very good at torture, both physical and mental torture. They're kind of inquisitive vampires. They like knowing how one's body functions, how one's mind functions, how to best break that down. They're called fiends by other vampires, and it is for a reason. So imagine you have this lordling with full control of their territory. They blood bond the vampires that they're interested in or that they have made people into vampires themselves. Everything is under their total control. A lot of younger vampires obviously had a problem with that, and they rebelled. It kind of spread clan to clan when the whole revolution started to happen, but by the time it got to Clan Tzimisce, by the time those younger controlled vampires realized that, yeah, they can take down their elders, they were not gonna back down. So other clans, the whole like revolution happened. They managed to kind of make the younger vampires back down for the most part and just come back to a coexistence of different rules, and that's where major clans have sprouted from. Clan Tzimisce, together with another clan, Clan La Sombra, were like, no way. We're not going back to that. We're not making friends with the people that have controlled us for years and years and years and years. So they split off and they made the very inhumane clan, well, not clan, but faction. Faction is the right word. Sabbat. Sabbat as a vampire faction does not care if mortals know that they exist as a vampire or not. They believe that they should be the rulers of mortals. They also really, really hate very old vampires, especially the third generation. They seek to annihilate them because they see absolutely nothing good from them whatsoever. And they tend to be one of the most animalistic, brutal factions that allow themselves to revel in their vampireness and, in ways you could say, evilness, rather than trying to stay civilized and kind of acting like mortals would. As Clan Tzimisce, now we're talking about the new clan, the people that, are actually using vicissitude rather than the old farts that are living in their own castles. They carried a lot of their own customs into this new setting. Majority of vampires in Vampire the Masquerade are running off humanity. Remember when I said that Tzimisce are very inhumane clan? Well, humanity was not gonna work for them, so they created a lot different paths with their own categories of virtues and sins, effectively. Like, if I do this, I feel good. If I do this, we all agree that that's kind of bad. And depending on what kind of path that you take, those virtues and sins are entirely different. They are normally based on something ideological. So there is, for example, a path that entirely focuses on metamorphosis and changing yourself with vicissitude a lot. There is a path that's like a path of Lilith that is more spiritually focused, that venerates Lilith and tries to get closer to Lilith, normally through self-pain. Paths that are available to Sabbat vampires, which is a faction that Tzimisce kind of were one of the founding members of, are a lot of them are kind of edgy. And you're gonna see blood and gore and pain, and quite a few of them are just really letting yourself loose to the feel good and the drugs and all sorts of other things. Now, mortals exist, right? They do, and they're food for vampires like Tzimisce, but because they exist, they kind of need to interact with them regardless, even though they hate the idea of interacting with mortals, because Tzimisce would see a mortal to be quite beneath them. Because of that, Tzimisce is one of the first clans to spawn revenant families. So if a vampire gives their blood to a human and not a vampire, they make a ghoul. This person will be completely under the vampire's control, will do whatever vampire wants. They have a bit of vampire abilities, not a lot, but they can heal themselves and things like that. They're like a human enhanced. And if they get their blood fix from their vampire master every month, they're not gonna age or die. And you can prolong this for a very long time. Now, if the ghoul suddenly does not get their fix and they have exceeded the human lifespan, they're gonna devolve into death really fast. But if they have not exceeded their human lifespan, they will just rapidly age to the age that they're supposed to be at. So you can see how bad it is when you've been a ghoul for 60 years and you would be 80, but you became a ghoul at 20 and you're suddenly aging 60 years in the span of a month. You wouldn't want that to happen. So ghoul is kind of not a nice position to be in if you're like a human person. Effectively, you have a master and you have to work for them and satisfy them so that they give you their blood every single month. Tzimisce went one step further and they started breeding the ghouls. And what happened is that they ended up with families born that have a semi-vampiric blood in them from the very get-go. So they're not immortal, but they can live longer than a regular person, even if they're not given vampire blood. They also have some vampire blood abilities. These families, they suffered from a lot of inbreeding, and they have like Tzimisce have like a couple select families, so there's like branches of those families, and they interact with those people instead. And most often, if they're gonna be embracing, it will be from, well, making another vampire. It will be from like those revenants or ghoul families, because they just don't really like mortals. They see themselves as above them, so they don't even want to interact with them. With all of that explained, Tzimisce are very hard to explain. They're kind of very complicated. Let's go to their clan weaknesses. So in version 20, Tzimisce has to rest with at least 2 handfuls of the soil that has been important to them as a human. So normally it would be like, I don't know, a place where you got embraced, or a place where you have been born, perhaps even the country that you were born in, or like the city that you were born in. You need soil from there. If you're resting not with the soil, like if you're not lying on it or if you're not close to it, your dice pool gets halved every single time when you rest until you can only use 1 dice. It's not a very nice weakness, and it is quite fun to play with if you're the player or if somebody else is a player inside your group that's playing a Tzimisce, because that means like display Tzimisce soil, and suddenly a whole big quest opens up to go and get this Tzimisce some extra soil, because your teammate is about to be very, very useless, and they're probably really panicking about it. The 5th edition made this weakness, Bane, a bit easier to handle, because they no longer specify soil, they say something that your character really cares about. This can be proof of their rulership, for example. So imagine a person always sleeping hugging a crown. This can be a particular house, like they would always have to sleep in that house, and when that house no longer exists, I suppose they would need to build something on that land and always sleep there and nowhere else. This can be a particular group of people. For example, you only feel restful when surrounded by blonde women with D-cup breasts for some reason. Anyway, it has to be something specific. It can be as easy or hard to attain as you want, as long as your storyteller is okay with it. You have to rest with it being close to you or surrounding you in some way, or else you're gonna take willpower damage in this system. 5th edition also has this thing that is a compulsion, where if you botch a roll, you don't just fail to meet like the roll's difficulty, because let's say that you're rolling, I don't know, 3 d10s and the difficulty is 6. If you roll like 3, 2, 4, you fail the roll, but you didn't botch it. And let's say you're rolling 3 d10s, the difficulty is 6, and you rolled 3, 2, 1. One is kind of that super bad fail, and it would make it into a botch. So if you botched a roll, you suffer a compulsion in V5, and Tzimisce suffers the compulsion of becoming obsessed with possessing something in the scene. This can be a person, this can be an item, this can be anything. Like, suddenly you need to make something in the scene yours, and not like in a kleptomaniac way, but more like the storyteller goes, you know, that guy over there, super awesome. You want to own him. That means making a ghoul, or maybe making a vampire, or otherwise, like, maybe just dominating their mind a little bit to, like, be super into you. That sort of thing. Or it could be like an object where you absolutely need to have that Rolex watch that you see through a window right now. Cue a scene of badly executed vampire heists inside a closed jeweler's shop. So that can be a thing. This would be me summing up Tzimisce to you in a rather simplified manner. A lot of Tzimisce that you would encounter would be in the faction Sabbat, or would be entirely independent lords of their own domain. And there's a lot more to their culture than that. Like, they had a rulership model where out of all of the lords, they like elected some amount of lords to the council, but they would also have the problem of not really trusting themselves. So whoever headed the council had this bad, kind of, bad tendency to die. Normally die by the hands of other council members that then would elect another council member to rule over Tzimisce that then would also kind of die. There's other interesting things such as the third generation vampire that started Tzimisce is a pile of sludge underneath. I think it was New York, according to the canon lore. There was a vampire that during the whole revolt went out, set out to kill him. He made it look as if he died to this vampire, instead staking this vampire and taking his form through the art of vicissitude. But also, that's just one of his forms, because in reality, he's like a 2 miles of sludge. Like, through the use of vicissitude, he just expanded and slimed everywhere, and apparently he's sliming up full sewers. And at any point, he can, like, separate part of that slime and mold it into shape and send it to walk around if he really wants to. Normally, apparently, he's not very interested in that because, once again, Tzimisce are kind of anti-human, so there wouldn't be a lot of reasons to do that. If you read more lore, like, there are subservient Tzimisces that serve this sludge vampire and feed him whole trucks and buses full of people. There's some really fun lore surrounding the clan. It would be very hard to fit it all into one video. This is not your baby's first clan, this is the advanced clan of clanning. Now, since version 5, it is not unheard of for the Anarch movement to have some Tzimisce in them. The Anarch movement is your rebel movement that opposes the faction called Camarilla, which is your we must pretend to be human, uphold the Masquerade, and also we have a power structure where we have like a prince, and then the prince has like his own council, and then the counselors have like their own minions, and it goes down and down and down, and you need approval from the prince in order to do stuff like make new vampires, and the prince can tell you to do stuff, and other council members can tell you to do stuff, and then you have to go and do it if you're living inside this prince's domain. Anarchs are the faction that don't like it, but they're not quite Sabbat. So they don't really want to be exposing themselves to mortals or ruling mortals. A lot of them are actually quite passionate about mortal affairs, so they don't just like dismiss mortals out hand, but they are opposing this Camarilla faction because they don't want to be underneath somebody else's boot, though they themselves made also a power structure where instead of a prince now you have a baron, but it is a bit more loose than the Camarilla's power structure. So they feel like, down with the authority and they're super better than that, but in reality, give them enough time and they will probably become another version of that. And that is entirely separate from the Sabbat, which is your wild vampires that are very unapologetically vampire, that are very ruthless, that are just allowing their desires to run free. And with the case of Tzimisce, they're cold fiends for a reason. They're great at torture, so they're also great at fleshcraft. So it is really not unheard of them to make tables out of orphaned children, or create war machines out of entirely realistic version of a human centipede, where they just like connect a whole bunch of people together into some sort of monstrosity that can deal a lot more damage because now it's giant. That sort of thing. They're the kind of people that would build a cathedral of flesh, and in fact that is a thing where the floor is flesh, the walls are flesh, the ceiling is flesh, and all of that flesh came from somewhere, normally from living people, and then sometimes the flesh continues living as this new flesh amalgamation. They're very anti-human. They're as the other side from the human as you can get in general. And ever since version 5, there are some of them that are part of the Anarch movement. They would probably be a bit less anti-human than the ones in the Sabbat or the independent old clan Dracul. And there are a couple that are inside Camarilla, but normally it's they kind of, normally they don't mix. But if you want to play Tzimisce, that is part of faction Camarilla, by version 5's rules, you can. You would probably talk with the storyteller about how that happened. I suppose you just really disagreed with how your clan normally do, but you would still kind of be playing this colder outsider with a lot less warmth when it comes to viewing anything that's not yet undead or in any way special. So if it is not a mage, not a werewolf, not a fairy, not a vampire, if it's like your average everyday human, you probably really still look down upon them. Because that's just what Clan Tzimisce do. So there you go. I do actually like Clan Tzimisce. I think that they're really awesome and cool. And I like the fact that they're not your typical, more human vampire. As in, it's not just a human that needs to drink blood and has superpowers, but they have all of these very alien and inhumane things to them because it makes it fun to play. It's fun to play something that's not you, and that's as far removed from being you as you can get. inside playing a tabletop. It's almost as good as playing a giant worm with a mouth that would also be very far removed from you, and considering that their third generation vampire is currently sludge underneath New York, it would probably not be the most unheard of thing for Tzimisce to just have the need to try to become a giant flesh worm just to remove themselves a bit further from the humanity and test the limits of what can be done, I suppose. I hope I shed the light on the clan at least a little bit. Once again, this is a very hard clan to cover, but I wanted to, so I did it. I did it today. Yay me. Even before I covered some of the easier to cover clans. I like Tzimisce. I don't know what to tell you. If you still have questions about it, feel free to ask about it in the comment sections down below. If you want to correct me, please do so. Once again, this is kind of a hard clan to explain and to talk about because it just involves so many little mechanics and like so many little factions and groupings. Like out of Old Clan Ghoul, there's also like an alliance between very specific vampires in like a very specific space, and then they're famous for having that alliance. And the alliance over time like started including vampires that are not only Tzimisce but like other type of it's like a rabbit hole that keeps on digging itself. I wanted to give you the basics, and that's about as basic as you can get about this clan while still explaining what the clan is and mostly how it operates. If you like these kind of videos, please consider subscribing, but please take a look at the rest of my channel, because I also do occult videos and I also do gaming videos. I am currently uploading the Vampire the Masquerade What Is This Clan series once a week, and I will be doing so until I run out of clans. I will probably maybe cover something else from the exact same tabletop. I don't know. I might leave it standing be for a while and it will just, we're just gonna shrink down to just being occult and gaming, or I might start covering something else tabletop, or I might cover something more about Vampire the Masquerade. I kind of like covering Vampire the Masquerade, but I do expect myself to run out of it eventually, so there's that. So take a look at the rest of the channel. If you like it, please subscribe. I really like that number when it go up. And thank you so much to my Patreon supporters that help me produce videos like these. I hope it wasn't too much of a pain to sit through. Thank you for watching. I hope I'm gonna see you in my other videos. Toodaloo.